Over the last few years, I've sent over 5 million LinkedIn DMs, and as a result, generated millions in pipeline revenue. And the only way I was able to achieve that was through constant testing and learning. So in this video, I'll be sharing 30 things you can do to send better DMs, get more replies to your DMs, and make more money for your business on LinkedIn. The first tip is you should start your messages with more context. Now, when you're reaching out to someone, you want to make sure that your message is very relevant so that they're more likely to respond. And one of the best ways to do that is opening your message with an observation. An observation could be, oh, I saw you fundraised, I saw you liked a post, or I saw you're hiring. Adding observation makes your message more relevant to your prospects, so therefore they're more likely to respond to you in the DMs. No one likes it when they're getting pitched for no reason. Therefore, by having an observation, having some relevant context, you're more likely to get a response. The second tip is once you're in conversation with someone, match their conversational tone and style. You may notice that you've had a conversation that seemed to die out over time. And typically when I look back at those conversations that did die out, I can see that I'm personally probably sending very long messages and they're sending very short ones. Or they're using very conversational tones, but I'm using very formal language. What you want to be doing is matching their energy, matching their tones, matching their sentence lengths to make them feel like they're talking to someone they know. Your third tip is to maximize your DM volume. So on LinkedIn, you have multiple ways to reach out to people. The first is your LinkedIn connection requests. You can send between 400 and 800 connection requests per month, and that just depends on the warmth of your account. You can also send 800 free in-mails. Now, an in-mail is almost like a bit of a cold email on LinkedIn, and you can send 800 free ones to something called an open profile. Now, an open LinkedIn profile is someone that's literally clicked a button saying, I want to be an open profile, and I want to receive LinkedIn open in-mails. Now, the thing to caveat is not all LinkedIn profiles are open, only about 20% are. But if you do it right, you can be sending 1,600, so 1,600 cold connection requests and cold LinkedIn emails every single month. Now, by maximizing your volume of outreach, you obviously therefore maximize the number of meetings you're booking. Now, if you want to take your outreach volume to the next level, you can also leverage account rotation. And this is a pretty new thing. What you can do is use a software like HeyReach and basically connect up all of your LinkedIn accounts. And that's your account, maybe family members, maybe your colleagues, maybe employees. Put them all in there and set up a campaign with account rotation. So you select multiple senders for a single campaign, and then HeyReach will automatically rotate through those accounts. This way you can scale up your volume massively by going beyond a single account. The fifth tip is use casual language. Now, LinkedIn has this air about it, about being formal and about being PC, and that's exactly the pattern we can interrupt. If you send messages that just read so much more casually, as if you're speaking to someone on WhatsApp, you're more likely to get a response, and that's just because people aren't used to other people communicating in that way, but that's how they want to be communicated to. So really simply, just act as if you're messaging a friend. And this leads directly into tip 6. You should try to use abbreviations. For example, LMK, like let me know, or LOL, laughing out loud. You can use that language inside a message. I know it sounds a bit weird. We're on LinkedIn. We shouldn't be doing this. This is supposed to be a professional networking place. But honestly, by doing that, you just cut through so much faster. You're more likely to feel human and just disrupt stiff LinkedIn norms. Now, tip 7 is interesting. If you have a really strong offer where there's clear ROI, clear guarantees, clear irresistibility with your offer, I highly suggest adding it to your connection request and adding it very clearly in your in-mail and asking for the call outright. I've seen people offer free trials, free 30-day pilots, even guarantees on their offer, and they would perform better just going outright with the offer in the in-mail and in the connection request than trying to have a conversation and warming it up to eventually book in a call. Tip 8 is given out. So if you're in the act of having a conversation with someone and you're sending DMs and you want to maybe book in a call or ask them for the call to action to do something, you add an out to the end of the sentence. For example, hey, does it make sense to chat about this, comma, or not, let me know. By adding that or not, let me know, you remove all the tension from that line, from that moment, and it makes you feel, hey, I don't care if you book in or not, but if you want to, I'm here. Now that makes you look less needy in the DMs, which is better for you because then prospects are more likely to respect you. Lesson 9 is using social proof, but subtly. Now, if you're in a conversation with someone and they mention a pain point, they could say, oh, I'm having some issues with ad fatigue. You could say, oh, cool, we can help with that. Do you want to have a chat on a call? And that's, a completely logical step. Or you can say, interesting. I've seen this before in this niche. We had a client who went through something very similar, but we eventually got them out of it up to a 2x ROAS. Shall I show you how? That conversation, that second version is so much more powerful, and all because we use that subtle social proof line. We weren't trying to give them a case study link. We weren't sending them a testimonial video. We had a single micro statement line that basically showed we were relevant, we were on topic, and we had direct experience with the pain that that prospect had. Now, lesson 10 is the inverse of lesson 7. If you're in a conversation going back and forth and you don't have a super strong offer or you need to qualify a little bit harder, I highly suggest do not pitch until you've uncovered the pain. Now, what I find on LinkedIn is that people really hate getting pitched to too quickly because they're like, well, this is not relevant for me. Why are you in my DMs? Why are you spamming me? And you know what? Hands up, that's completely fair. And if you don't have an amazing offer, fair dues as well. So instead, work the conversation to identify the pain. And you could say questions like, oh, what's going wrong? What are you struggling with? How is XYZ going? Are your ads scaling? Asking questions that begin to elicit pain. And once you've nailed into the pain, then you can go to pitch a service or solution. Now, this works better in your interest because you don't want people to be buying your service that don't have a pain because they're just going to churn or they're just going to waste the time on a sales call. Now, tip 11 is a non-negotiable. If you're doing any sort of cold outreach on LinkedIn, you have to be using the posted on LinkedIn feature inside Sales Navigator. Now, what I found is that filter segments your whole lead list for only the profiles that are actually being used daily. We know lots of people, maybe your friends, they have LinkedIn accounts, but they never sign in. And honestly, that's a lot of LinkedIn. So by using this feature, you can basically filter out a 10K lead list into, for example, a 2K lead list, and then you can choose to only send connection requests to the active profiles. It's no surprise that I've seen a 2 to 4x increase in connection acceptance rates just by using that feature alone. Now, tip 12 exists because LinkedIn is not like cold email. If you've ever done any sort of cold email before, you know you got to get a lot of inboxes, a lot of domains, you got to rotate them, you got to warm them up, and then you basically go and hit the whole market up with a message. And then they kind of forget that you exist, and then you go hit them up again in about 6 months' time. That doesn't exist on LinkedIn. When you're on LinkedIn having a conversation with someone, let's say it was 3 months ago, that message history will last forever. Any conversation you had, people can come back to you. So if you're spamming someone, they're going to remember that. And then when you go out to reach to them, when they do actually have a pain point, they're going to be like, oh, I didn't like this guy. He was annoying me. The key is if you want to do any sort of follow-up, you need to space them out longer because of this infinite message history on LinkedIn chat. Lesson 13 is about prioritizing who you reach out to out of the active profiles. On LinkedIn, there are many public signals that you can use to know who's more of a relevant prospect to speak to. The 3 are if they've liked or commented, if they're profile viewed, or if they've connected with you. Those 3 things signify to me at least that this person is actively interested in you as a person. Maybe they don't want to talk about your offer right now. That's okay, but they are aware of who you are. This is a perfect lead to reach out to because they're more likely to respond to you. And I've seen literally a 10x increase in response rates just by reaching out to people that were already aware of who I was. Now we're at tip 14. I want you to remember that the first message you send probably won't land, and probably the 10th won't either, or the 20th. You need to continue to test and iterate your style of messaging and what you're trying to send because granted, we don't know what's going to work until we give it a go. Tip 15, your goal is not to book a meeting in your first message. Instead, it's to get a reply. The very first thing you should be thinking about in your outreach is how do I get this person to respond to me instead of trying to book a meeting. What I found is that people who respond to you are more likely to naturally book in a call than someone who's completely cold and you're asking them for a call straight away. So the question is, what should you send to get a reply? And that's tip number 16. Try to send a this versus that question. So for example, you could say, hey, are you scaling right now or trying to be more profitable? It gives people an option to choose either A or B, option 1 or option 2. And what I typically found is that it's easier for people to respond when they have only 2 options to give. Now, the clever bit is knowing what sort of this or that question to ask to lead them down the right angles. So for example, if you're speaking to someone who's a new CTO, you might say, hey, are you guys working on old features or new features right now? That might be a natural way to have a conversation. Now, tip 17 is a non-negotiable. You must always be running connection campaigns. So what you should be doing is using an automation tool, for example, like HeyReach, and uploading your lead lists into HeyReach and literally clicking go, and you can be live in 10 minutes. And what that means is all your connection requests are automatically sent for you on your behalf every single day, and you're maximizing your quota. And if you didn't know already, you have a weekly quota on LinkedIn of how many connection requests you can send. So if you miss that quota, you don't get that back. It doesn't add up over time and become a bank. You've just missed that number completely. So you want to be maximizing every single week. Tip 18 is for people that are already in conversations. You may notice that a conversation sort of dies and it doesn't really go anywhere. And I found that the number one reason for that happening is you're not asking enough questions. Every time you're having a conversation with someone, whether it's on LinkedIn or WhatsApp or iMessage or in person, you will notice that you always end your statement more or less with a question, because it gives then a chance for the other person in the conversation to respond. Tip number 19 is to qualify quietly. I'm sure you've been on a sales call where the salesperson was very clearly qualifying you, saying, oh, are you the decision maker? What's your revenue number? How much have you got budget for? And you're like, your sales guard initially goes up so fast. And if you do that on LinkedIn, on a message, they're just going to stop responding to you. So instead, you want to qualify very quietly by using proxy metrics. So instead of saying, for example, how much are you spending on ads every single month, you could say, how many new ad creators are you launching every single month? And that's generally a proxy to how much they're spending. But what's important is that the prospect doesn't feel like you're asking them for their revenue numbers or their ad spend. You're asking for something that's a bit more elusive and a bit more gated. Tip number 20 is to personalize beyond the surface level. It's very easy to say, hey, first name or hey, company name, but it's much more difficult to start to reference things on their website or on their YouTube channels or on the news. So something I like to do personally is when I have a conversation, I like to go, oh, awesome, I loved your landing page. It was a really cool feature you had there. And I will reference the feature and give it a name for it. What that does is shows that I've clearly went on their website and done some research. Tip 21 is to delay any sort of links or any sort of assets. This is not the place for you to be sending decks or for you to be pointing them to resources. This is the place to be understanding what they do, what their pains are, and if it's worthwhile you having a call with that prospect. Tip number 22 is focus on them and stop using we and I. This is a mistake I typically see in the first outbound message. What happens is people love to speak about themselves and their offer because they're trying to make it super irresistible and they're trying to make themselves seem more interesting, when in fact your prospect couldn't give a bigger toss what you're talking about, or you don't even know who you are. So instead, make that first message have the words you more than they have the words I or we, and you will see a literal increase in your response rates pretty quickly. Tip number 23 is to be short and scannable. What I tend to do is in my DMs, I don't try to send long paragraphs and long text, because the second you see a long paragraph, you think, oh, that's a lot to read in, and you start reading it, and then you get lost, and then you get confused, and then you just go, I don't care anymore, and you just move on. Instead, you need to be sending short scannable lines, typically separate lines, so that the person could quickly read it, quickly understand what's going on, and then quickly give you a response. You don't want to make this look like an email, unless of course your prospect does treat LinkedIn like emails, and typically for old school industries, this is true. Tip number 24 is to realize that only a percentage of your market is in market for your solution, so you should be flexible in conversation and be able to pivot naturally. What that means is if you're in conversation with someone and they just don't have the pain point, don't try to force the pain point or force the sales process. They probably will come into buying window down the line. Be flexible, notice that they don't want to buy right now, and pivot into just giving value, being kind, being useful, and then just moving on. Tip number 25 is don't be afraid to have more than 2 tracks of conversation at the same time. I don't know about you, but I have conversations with friends where we're actually speaking about 2 different things at the same time, and I'm responding to each message separately, and it's a bit like this and that. Now that's really cool because that's a very natural thing. So you can do the same thing with your prospect. It doesn't have to be a singular arc, and that makes it feel for the prospect like a much more natural conversation. It will perform better, and you will literally book in more calls and get a higher response rate. Tip 26, you can respond with simple one-liners. For example, if a prospect asks you a question and it's a bit confusing, you don't need to try and answer it with a confusing message back. You can literally just say, what do you mean by that? Question mark. It's a complete frame flip. Typically in conversations where you're trying to sell, you're trying to justify yourself and you're trying to make yourself seem intelligent and seem valuable and seem useful, when in fact sometimes pulling away from a conversation works better. Tip number 27 is to use intelligent follow-ups. What I found is if someone's ghosted me but it was a good conversation, I will wait a week or two and I will just send them a compliment, and that's it. It creates an air of, I know you exist, you still know I exist, you probably owe me a response, and more often than not, I get a response pretty quickly. Tip 28 is to track connection acceptance rates. You should be aiming, on average across most industries, between 15 and 30% as an acceptance rate. Now, some industries are lower, so for example, if you're selling into e-commerce, you will see a sub 10% acceptance rate, and then it will be much higher if you're selling into certain industries where it's not that salesy. For example, say you're selling into hospitality, you typically might see a 40% acceptance rate. It all just depends on who you're reaching out to, but on average, we're looking around 15 to 30%. Tip 29 is to send blank connection requests. Blank connection requests get around a 20% higher acceptance rate, which is awesome because that means you're speaking to more prospects. Now, that seems counterintuitive because LinkedIn gives gives you an option to send something, but you're better off just saying nothing at all, because if you do, you will raise the sales guard. And again, the only time I would go against this idea is if you have a really irresistible offer, and if so, in that case, just send something with your connection note or send something with your in-mail. And tip 30 is to intentionally build trust before you try to book in the call. And the best way to build trust on LinkedIn without you doing any extra DMs is to create content on your personal profile. All you have to do is post consistently on your profile, posting about your case studies, your hot takes, your industry insights, and as a result, your connection acceptance rates will increase, your response rates will increase, and your meeting book rates will also increase too. Now, videos like this are a great way to speed learn lots of extremely useful things. But the issue is, if you're a beginner, you're probably missing out on the foundational elements to make LinkedIn work right. So click here to go watch the next one, where I walk through every step of the LinkedIn lead generation strategy that has literally made me millions for myself and for my clients. You can copy it yourself, implement it today, and start generating dozens of leads for your business. See you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.